ocean wave, who can say where it begins? Who can tell where it will end? Like a wave, an historical event begins, mounts, builds, breaks, and even in breaking already is followed by another in some pattern which leads to an almost inevitable result. Men appear, act their parts, and are replaced by other men. At times, more waves break, more act to speed the flow of what leaves history. Such a year was 1492.
I, Lorenzo de Medici, did help to beautify the city of Florence.
I, Leonardo da Vinci, observed the flight of birds and thought that man could fly.
I, Ferdinand, the Catholic king.
And I, Isabella the queen, did unite the kingdom of Spain.
I, Christopher Columbus, of Genoa, embarked upon a voyage of discovery.
I sailed, I tilled,
I wove.
we lived.
Come back with us in your imagination almost 5 centuries. You will see the places where these events began. Where records serve, you will hear the words truly spoken. For from these events came other events, and you and I are the products of them all. It is all part of the saga of Western man. It is the year 1492. The end of an era. By 1492, the last Caesar had been dead more than 1,000 years, and there was little above ground to remind one of the order, art, and knowledge that had been Greece and Rome. The highways had lost their pavings. The bridges were decayed, and in any case they led to nowhere, for the harshness of the Middle Ages had driven most of the people off the land. It was a much less populated world than it had been. How many invasions? How many crop failures? How many black plagues? There were no nations, only small lords struggling to keep their holdings and independence and their feudal retainers. But if there were no political order, little commerce, and even less peace, there was a deep faith and a firm belief in the glory of an afterlife to compensate for the bitterness of earthly existence. A belief so deep, so all-present, that even in its statues of the saints, the stone reflected the soul rather than the body. Since the death of Rome, Western civilization had shrunk. To the east was the mighty Turk, to the west the ocean men called the Dark Sea. For so long, Europe had huddled in between. But the Middle Ages were ending. Another era was being born. If an age can be said to have a birthplace, then the modern age was born in Florence. By 1492, it was the most beautiful and advanced city of its times. It held the greatest group of artists and intellects the world has ever known, inquiring minds, bold innovators, seekers of knowledge. Both the beauty of their city and the skill of its artists were cause for great civic pride. A stable government sat in the Palazzo Vecchio, and in the city of Florence and in its countryside there was law and order and peace. The population loved the new and the joyous, and the exteriors of its churches dressed in graceful marbles. A new, bold style. It was a wealthy city. It cared little for noble blood, and a great deal for hard work and ability. Most of its money was young, but tasteful. It was a rebirth of art not seen since the days of Rome. It all began when the Guild of the Woolweavers announced a contest for the doors of the baptistry. The greatest artists in Italy competed, and the creation of these doors was a school from which emerged artists even greater than their masters. They dealt with biblical tales, such as the sacrifice of Isaac. But they dealt with it in a human style. The figures represented men of flesh and blood. They were not symbols of ethereal spirit. In 1492, the most important man in Florence was Lorenzo, head of the House of Medici, the greatest art patron of all times. Almost every major artist of the Renaissance was his protege. Almost every project for learning was backed by his money. He was the greatest of merchants and bankers, for in this modern age being born, trade and the handling of money were fast replacing the aristocracy of land. It was a new attitude towards life. The Medici proteges reflected it in their art. Fra Angelico's Descent from the Cross. It was one of the earliest attempts in Christian art to represent the human form in true terms. Madonna and Child with St. Anne, a further step.
As models, I used the faces of our peasants.
Botticelli's Madonna of the Magnificat.
After all, she was a mother and he was a child.
But not everyone was happy with this frank, new style.
I tell you, the Queen of Heaven and the Christ child did not look like that.
It was impossible to hold back art in this era. By 1492, Botticelli himself was painting completely pagan subjects as the birth of Venus. Others would follow. After all, they reasoned the human form, too, was a divine creation. The Greeks had done it this way, and man had just rediscovered Greece and Rome. It was as if Renaissance men were putting Plato and the other Greek philosophers on a level with Christ. In fact, Pico della Mirandola, one of Florence's greatest minds, did just that.
They were both divine. Plato had intellectual divinity. Our Lord, the divinity of truth and the spirit.
Sacrilege. Ye adorers of this world, the true life is hereafter. If it is this world which is beautiful and pleasing, then where are we all to go? What comes after?
In truth, the attitude towards religion was changing. Man was increasingly concerned with this world, not willing to accept everything on faith. The supreme expression of this Renaissance was born among these Tuscan hills. Perhaps he was the most inquiring mind of all time. A man who was a painter, an architect, a sculptor. But most of all, he was a scientist, the first in modern times. He investigated, he probed and experimented in spite of superstition, tradition, and bigotry. His early years he spent in this house. His name was Leonardo da Vinci. These are things he thought and wrote.
I, Leonardo da Vinci, drew this portrait of myself. Perhaps Plato is right, and all things are known, but many are forgotten. If so, how many are forgotten, for how much there is to answer? Man and life and nature. Above all, man. In painting, look to the face. Let your proportions be true and harmonious, but let them live as the human lives. It lies in the brush. There is more knowledge to be acquired than time. Alas. Be silent and alone. The more you give of yourself, the less you have. Soldiers in battle most often shout, in excitement or even in fear. There are true proportions to the human form, and they are most often the same. The greatest difference is in the length of the leg, for the trunk and head most often are alike. To clothe the body, one must know what lies underneath. Most important is the knowledge of the structure of the bones. Anatomy is the artist's first tool. I can make machines of war, great and small, easy to transport and suitable to any task. Their use I leave to princes. I can build cannons, light and heavy, which fire a charge which then explodes to make many smaller charges. Such cannons make easy defenses. The structure of all living things is most ingenious and sparing of its materials. The architecture is greater than mind can conceive. I believe I can make man fly. I believe that I can construct a machine to raise man in the air on wings. Perhaps by the use of an air screw which turns swiftly. In pious subjects, let truth dominate. For wherever the soul may be, we can only picture it by the body. St. Jerome lived in the desert. He could not be fully fleshed. Let them call it an anatomy lesson. It is a true one. The execution of a painting is the least of its parts. It is the conception and the composition which requires the greatest skill. Much work I began and did not finish, or left to others. There is much to answer, and so little time. So little time.
It was a new age. These were new. They were filled with the joy of earthly living, with confidence, stirring with the doubts of scientific inquiry. It would not be unopposed. It was Renaissance Florence's luck and misfortune that it was so solidly supported by Lorenzo de Medici. In April 1492, he died at the age of 43. The patron, the protector, the support was gone. The bigots rushed to return. Most of the painters and thinkers left. They spread through Europe. In not too long, all Europe was in Renaissance. But this is where the wave began. Elsewhere, it would break on a yet undiscovered shore.